I want to welcome you guys to our course on Romans. This video here is an introduction slash overview of what we're going to be discussing here throughout this course. And I hope you enjoy this. I hope you get some valuable information from this and decide to continue on with this course. But this course here is, just an overview. It's something to let you know before you purchase the course, decide to take it, whatever's going through your mind. Romans itself is a very important book of the Bible because it's really the gospel itself explained in detail. Paul himself, this is out of the two that I believe personally really detail the gospel itself. Galatians would really be his first one. He actually wrote the book of Galatians first. But Galatians was written first, and then we see more of an exposition given about the gospel given to the Romans. So you could probably look at the two to be, books as far as understanding the gospel. You could probably look at the two books as going together. Galatians is part 1, Romans is part 2, or part 1 extended. However you'd like to look at that, but ultimately Romans itself is a book that all Christians need to have a good understanding of. In fact, I believe we should have a good understanding of all the scriptures. But when it comes to understanding the gospel and soteriology, which is just a fancy word for saying salvation, the doctrine of soteriology is the doctrine of salvation. So when it comes to that, we need to have a look at Romans for this. In fact, there are 16 chapters in the book of Romans. We only have enough time for 12 lessons for this course. So we're not going to be able to expound this greatly, but we will try to spend a lot of time within the Word to help you to get a better understanding. You might find some more information within our workbook, as well as obviously opening up the Bible for yourself and reading the material. But the focus of this course here is to have that understanding of the gospel, soteriology, and be able to identify particular doctrines that are found in the book of Romans. And quite frankly, there's a lot of doctrines in the book of the book of Romans. So we're going to be, after this course here, after this particular video, we're going to spend some time breaking down Romans to help you better understand this. And the goal of this, as we said, to understand the gospel, but if you can easily understand or identify these doctrines, they'll help to stand out better, not only in this book of Romans, but throughout the other books as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and continue this introduction. So some of the things in which you'll learn throughout this course is that, if I can get my things right, there we go, the doctrines of grace and how are they involved in the Christian walk. This is not necessarily going to be one of the primary aspects of our study as we go through Romans, but there are going to be some things that are pointed out in our doctrinal list, our definitions. The doctrines of grace will be involved there as well, or they'll be added in there, they'll be listed. So we'll save more of an expounded educational course, I guess you could call this, for another course. But I want to point this out. These are some of the things you'll find within the book of Romans. So we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But you'll also see the process of salvation, or soteriology, as we've mentioned. Now, it's not going to be required. You don't have to learn the fancy word of soteriology, but it might be something helpful to when you're talking to somebody and they say, "It's like, what's your soteriology?" or, "Well, their soteriology is good," and so on. What they're talking about is, how does somebody understand salvation? Do they understand it good? Do they understand it bad? Can they articulate it well or not? So soteriology, you'll often hear that, but that's simply referring to the doctrine of salvation. But you also have an improved understanding and be able to articulate the gospel clearly. And this is one of the very important aspects to the Christian faith is that we have not only a right understanding of the gospel, but we're also able to clearly articulate it, because as Romans 1, 16 through 17 tells us that it is the power of God unto salvation for all who believe, first to the Jew and to the Gentile. So we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. This is just an introduction. So you'll also have this. I didn't really know where to stick this. This is not exactly something you're going to learn. But there's going to be a midterm exam and then a final exam. I didn't want to bog you guys down with a bunch of different quizzes throughout each lesson. So I decided just to settle with a midterm exam and then a final exam. And the purpose of this is obviously midterm, you'll be quizzed and tested over what you've learned over the previous material, the previous 6 lessons. And the final exam will, of course, be a whole compilation of everything that you've learned. And what we hope to get out of this is to equip you to properly preach the gospel, understand the gospel, and everything there is to know about the gospel. So you're going to need some material as if you decide to take this course. The first thing you will need is a Bible. This is the key focus. This is something every Christian needs. So we're going to spend a lot of time throughout these courses going over the scriptures. We're not going to be able to cover everything. As I've mentioned, this course is 12 weeks or 12 lessons, however you'd like to look at it, 12 modules. And there are 16 chapters, and as a man who likes to talk, who likes to expound things, there is a lot in Romans. I could spend a good hour, 2 hours on one chapter alone. So unfortunately, we do not have the time for this, and this is just an overview course. You'll also want to have a notebook on hand. This is completely optional, but it might be beneficial. We're going to try to, I want you to try to outline it yourself as far as the Ordo Salutis, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and as the process of sanctification and justification, sanctification, and glorification. So also some additional notes, anything that, because the workbook itself, we'll talk about here in a moment, is not going to have everything that we're talking over. It's just an outline as well as some additional information of what's going on in this course. So having a notebook on hand might be something helpful. You can have your questions there. If you hear, well, this is going to be on the test, you can write that down and you can go back and look at it later. Romans workbook, or a lesson outline, however you'd like to define it. Currently, and I say this because this video is going up on YouTube as well, as kind of a little teaser for this course that as of this recording we're currently developing. But this workbook itself, it will be, for those who are watching this video through the course itself on our learning platform, this is, you will have access to it by the time you're watching this video. The outline, the workbook, the PDF, whatever you'd like to call it, will be available. So there are two ways in which you can acquire this. One, you can purchase this course and you'll have access to the PDF within the course, or you can go and purchase it on our store page, on our Patreon, which the link will be in this video. And by purchasing it through that, you'll also receive a promotion code in which you can use that promo code to get that course offset, or the offset of the course, the comparison, the cost of the outline book will be deducted from the final fee for this course. So it's kind of a way to get a discount. You're basically keeping it the same. The book itself, it's not created yet, so I haven't really done the math as far as how much it would cost, but let's say $20. You purchase this on our store page, then you can get a $20 discount through purchasing this course on our learning platform. But if you've purchased it at full price, if you purchase this course at full price, then you do have access to that workbook as well. So the workbook itself, the outline is just that. It's going to be an outline of what we're discussing here. There's a little bit more information that we'll be having within the workbook, and it's going to have a couple different charts. It's going to have definitions, and I don't think I have that on here. We'll talk. I'll mention that here in a moment. We have a work chart in the workbook itself, the Ordo Salutis, just a fancy Latin way of saying the order of salvation, and that will be in there for you to look at, and hopefully to really, kind of outline that yourself. In fact, that's actually a challenge I want you to put down, is to write out, as we continue throughout the book of Romans, I'll try to get a chart created so that way you can use that to write out your Ordo Salutis on there as well. But definitions and doctrines, that's another thing that's going to be within the workbook itself. There's a lot of doctrines. There's some primary doctrines that really make up Romans. We'll talk about here in a moment. But within each lesson that we do, we're going to have a number of different definitions, which you will be quizzed on at the midterm and final exam. And these are very important for us to identify and know, just so that we can properly identify them as we're reading Scripture, as well as really the importance of knowing them. When you're reading and you're talking to somebody, you can look to these definitions and say, okay, well, yeah, this verse says this much, and this verse can be identified as or within the category of the doctrine of whatever doctrine that is. So we'll have that. We have the definitions themselves. They obviously do have the word and the definition, but we'll also have in there the verse reference throughout each lesson. So you'll be able to quickly go to those verses and see what the text says about that. Now, getting into the overview of this, of what's going on with Romans, we're almost done here. Romans itself was written in 56 AD during the end of Paul's third missionary journey. And then he most likely wrote this while he was in Corinth. Now, we don't specifically see this referenced that he is in Corinth in Romans. However, we see that Phoebe, Gaius, and Erastus are all mentioned in Romans chapter 16, which are all associated with Corinth. So that most likely, what that shows us is that he most likely wrote this book in Corinth. But then we also have some technical difficulties. There we go. Paul has not yet visited Rome. During the time of writing and as history plays out, he was not blessed to be able to visit the Church of Rome, but he's heard of their faith and he's really eager to see them. So what he does is he sends Phoebe to Rome with this letter to give to them a great detail of the doctrine of soteriology, which, as we said, is the doctrine of salvation. So it's very good, very commendable. There's nothing negative that Paul has to say about this church. He's heard a lot of good news, and so he just wants to provide a little bit of encouragement to them, as well as, perhaps even give them some sort of resource to combat things. Like we've mentioned earlier, Galatians is kind of like a summarized gospel or summarized Romans. At least that's personally how I view it. So he might have had this in play, that he's heard of the faithfulness in Rome, and knowing what he had to combat with the Galatians, perhaps he wanted to give them a tool in which they could use to defend against the right gospel. So particularly, there's a number of different thoughts in which we can go with that, but Romans could best be described as being the gospel expounded. In fact, that's personally how I view Romans. And that's where we want to go with this course, is how do we understand the gospel? Well, let's look at Romans and identify it. So the theme itself of Romans can be found, which we'll talk more in the next lesson. Romans 1:16 through 17 tells us that I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of salvation. Let me actually get my Bible open to the right page. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jews to the Jews first, and then also to the Greeks or Gentiles, depending on your translation. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteousness shall live by faith. So that's really the overall theme that we find with the book of Romans, is not to be ashamed, and that it is the power of God to salvation for all who believe. Now, some of these doctrines here in which we're going to be going over in this course, like I've mentioned, we have the doctrines of grace is not necessarily going to be the primary focus. However, these doctrines are played out, and what's known as the doctrines of grace, it makes up 5 doctrines, which is the doctrine of let me get my laser pointer here. There we go, that's better. We have the doctrine of total depravity. We'll find this. We'll also find unconditional election, and we'll find limited atonement, irresistible grace, and then perseverance of the saints. Now, I personally prefer R.C. Sproul. He actually expounded this. I would recommend this. It's not going to be required reading material for this course, but he's written a book expounding this in great detail. Really great job. And how he identifies, he's got a couple different preferred words he uses, but ultimately it's the same doctrine. Instead of perseverance of the saints, he uses preservation of the saints. And I think that's personally a better word to use, is preservation rather than perseverance, because it really shows the work of God through our lives. But ultimately, and we'll save this for another time, but the doctrines of grace, the tulip, come from that. About the 1500s is when the term was coined. And moving on, we'll talk about the sinfulness of man, our depravity, our wickedness, who we are prior to regeneration and salvation. We'll talk about what it means to be justified by faith alone. We'll talk about what regeneration is, as well as union with Jesus Christ, our adoption by Jesus Christ, and then our sanctification through Jesus Christ. So these are just an overview of what's going to be discussed throughout this course. Now, if you feel inclined to take this course, this assignment itself is more for your own personal benefit. This is not something you're going to be graded on, but I would like to see it if you're taking this course and like to see what you have. But this is more for your own personal benefit. This is kind of like a before and after assignment, because what we're going to have you do with this course before you go on any further is we want you to write out the gospel message of Jesus Christ according to your understanding. And what that means is what you know now, how would you personally articulate the gospel to somebody? And what we want to get out of this is by the end of the course, some of you, it might be the same, some of it might be a little bit different, some of it might be, let's say, limited or lacking within this first assignment. And then by the end of the course, you might have a better detailed explanation of what the gospel is. So this is strictly an assignment for you to look back from the beginning of the course to the end of the course and compare what you've learned, what you know now, compared to what you know by the end of the course. So you want to ask yourself, if somebody walked up to you or you walked up to somebody to give them the gospel, what would you say? So that's what we want to end this video on, this lesson. And if you enjoyed this, if it sparked your fancy, I would encourage you to check out the rest of the course, which can be available on our learning platform. So I believe that is everything. Yes, the power of the gospel, that is the next lesson, and that will be available to you after purchase. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want to know more, feel free to check out the course.